Those. So welcome everyone. There's two main audiences on the call today. We've got members of the Australian GDG AI for Science. That'll probably be the largest part of the audience today. And then there are also members of the Google Science Catalyst community, which is a Google of internal staff at Google who are passionate about advancing the sciences with AI. We should have a fairly relatively small group today, so we've decided to keep this really interactive, so everyone has full comment chat rights. But if that gets a little bit unwieldy at any point, we might ask everyone to hold questions until the end. We'll see how we go. Look, I'm gonna just hand straight over to Simon Carlisle, and Simon, you can introduce the rest of the team. Over to you.
Thanks, Scott. Let me just get this. Okay, so this first slide, just a splash slide. The team actually is non-trivial in number, as you can see. And I'll introduce exactly what we're doing in a moment. But I want to highlight, I'm Simon Carlisle, and my colleague and good friend Dick Lyon is the technical genius behind quite a lot of what we're doing. The other three people I'd like to highlight is Rob, is a Googler who's participating in this collaborative venture, and he will talk after me. Jason and Mariam are both postdocs that are part of the contribution that Macquarie University is making to this particular collaboration. Okay, so as you can see, it's a pretty large team. We've got a lot of external collaborators drawn from a number of different groups. There's a number of postdocs within the project itself, and a broad range of Googlers. Other than myself and Dick Lyon, most of these other Googlers are what we call 20%ers. So these are people who join the team and enabled to work on it 1 day a week. Google has this very interesting and useful approach where you can do something that's not related to your day job 1 day a week elsewhere in Google. So we've got quite a lot of 20%ers on this, and it's been fantastic because they come from such a broad range of technical backgrounds and capabilities that it really helps mix up the way that we think about what we're doing. So let's start with the challenge. So in Australia alone, 3.5 million Australians have some form of hearing loss. That's 1.5 billion people worldwide. Now, when I say some form of hearing loss, about of the 1.5 billion, 430 million people are hard of hearing to a level that has significant impact on their quality of life and productivity, so that they have a disabling hearing loss. Now, it's not just that's the problem. It leads to social isolation, that can lead to depression and ill health. It's the one factor that we know is reversible, a risk factor for dementia. And it's costing in a worldwide cost around about $1 trillion a year. This is an enormous amount of money, and it really is not just the costs of managing hearing loss and the sequelae thereof, so depression and mental ill health, etc., but also productivity. So this is a big problem. It's a human problem. So why we've focused on this is for a bunch of reasons. One is that although hearing aids have been around for almost 100 years, and there's been an enormous amount of research and development that's gone into them in the last handful of decades, they still don't work very well where they're really needed. That's in these socially interactive scenarios when we're trying to listen to speech against a background of noise or other talkers. And part of the reason is that the technology in hearing aids and cochlear implants is pretty legacy. There's been a lot that's happened in terms of our understanding of the mechanics of the cochlea and the coding in the auditory central nervous system, etc., that aren't necessarily incorporated in the underlying models for current hearing aids and cochlear implants. So we're also well aware of the fact that, at least in hearing aids in particular, The industry is pretty well dominated by a very small number of players, 5 large hearing aid companies, and it's pretty well stitched up end to end in terms of the R&D that they do and the services that they provide. So there's not a lot of appetite for innovative R&D. It's not a broken model as far as the companies are concerned. Now, one of the things we'd like to do is to find ways where we can really stimulate some innovative R&D, and I'll get to how we want to do that in a second. I'm talking here not just as a Googler, but prior to that, I was a professor of neuroscience at the University of Sydney for 20 years, and I've also been a vice president for research, one of the world's large hearing aid companies. So I've had the opportunity to have my feet in a number of different camps to make these observations. Now, we want a radical new and state-of-the-art approach to breakthrough, and that's where Google comes in, because what it brings is, of course, machine learning, computational modeling, and a lot of those advanced technologies. Pixel Buds, phones, watches, these are all relatively new technologies, and we need to be thinking about how we can bend them to this problem as well. So the partnership is made up of a variety of characters. You'll recognise Cochlear Proprietary Limited on the right-hand side, the world's leaders in the development of multi-channel cochlear implants. In fact, that was an Australian invention. They're headquartered here in Sydney. NAL, another well-kept secret, National Acoustics Laboratory, is co-located with Cochlear and Macquarie University, and it's has been at the forefront for more than half a century of hearing aid development and testing. And in fact, every audiologist in the world will use their fitting formulas or derivatives thereof when they're fitting hearing aids. Hang on, what's going on? We seem to have lost the screen. Hang on a sec. Okay, please don't do that, Rob. So Macquarie University, about 10, 12 years ago, decided on building a research centre of excellence called the Australian Hearing Hub, and the National Acoustics Labs and Cochlear are co-located there, and that's where we are at this very moment. 2 other partners are the Shepherd Centre and Next Sense, and these are not-for-profit providers who are providing hearing services to those that are hard of hearing. They play an incredibly important role because they are the voice of the user as far as we're concerned, and so from a research and development and an engineering point of view, we're well aware of the risk that we fall in love with our own engineering and research solutions. And what we really need to do is to be constantly being made aware of, what are the real problems and what's going to really move the needle when it comes to helping those that are hard of hearing. So the project, there are 2 major projects, and I'm going to whip through this fairly quickly. The first is called hyper-personalisation. This is really our precision medicine approach. And basically what we're doing is we're taking this computational model of the inner ear, which my colleagues will talk about in more detail in a moment. And this is an invention of my colleague Dick Lyon. While he's a long-time Googler, he's been in the Valley for about 40 years, and we've Googled for about 15 of those. And he developed this computational model of the inner ear, which was open source by Google about 10 years ago now. And so there's quite a lively community of people that have been contributing to it and its GitHub repositories. And what we've done is we've taken this computational model, and this is a diagrammatic, you can't see that, hang on, try that. This is a diagrammatic version of the model. It's a knowable model in that different components of the model correspond to different physiological components in the inner ear. And so what, pardon me. And so what we've done is we've taken this model and we put it into an end-to-end machine learning framework so that we can what's called backpropagate error signals to train the model and also to train machine learning based hearing aids. Now, by training in inner ear impaired model, we might take, for instance, an audiogram and we will apply that to the model, present some signals to the model, and then have a perceptual neural detection model here, which will set up a training gradient, which will begin to tune the model so it develops the output that matches the input according to this audiogram. So this is one way that we can not only have a CARFAC model of the normal behaving ear, but that we can then tune the CARFAC model so that it begins to emulate different causes of hearing impairment. And the basic idea is if we have a normally hearing model and an impaired model, we present the same sounds to that. There's going to be differences, obviously, in the neural outputs of these two models. That's the output of CARFAC, is the neural activity pattern that's on the auditory nerve. So given that the perception of our perception of hearing is based on the characteristics of these signals, what we can do is we can look at the differences between the outputs of the normal model and the hearing impaired model, and then use that as a training signal to train a standard hearing aid. And the idea is that with many, many iterations of this, we're training a hearing aid to fit it best, to create an output that is coming out of the impaired model that is as similar as we can get it to the neural signal output from the normal model. So we're using a physiological indicator of the goodness of fit of the hearing aid to the hearing impaired person. Of course, what we can also do is use an unconstrained target and use a machine learning hearing aid and send our loss function and training gradients to not just encapsulate the changes that we need in a hearing aid, but to invent and create new ways of signal processing that attempts to invert what is happening in the inner ear model. Now, we're well aware from an engineering perspective that we're very unlikely to be able to completely invert what's going on, that is to overcome or repair what's going on in the hearing impaired model. But we think that this approach using predicted neurophysiological output is probably going to get us a lot closer to what we want than when compared to the legacy models that currently underlie hearing aids and cochlear implants. So I'm going to hand it over to Rob, who's going to take us a little deeper into the machine learning and reimagining the hearing aid. So over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Simon. Let me have a sit down. Hi, everyone. My name's Rob Schoenberger. I'm an engineer at Google. As Simon mentioned, there's actually a big team of people that have been behind this. I want to give credit to all of those people. I'm just the guy presenting today. So let's talk in a little bit more detail about some of these things.
Press the arrow at the bottom. You're in this, yes, something else to there.
Okay. This arrow.
Yes.
Sorry, folks, technical difficulties. So let's talk about what, like a more detailed version of what we're talking about here. So when we're talking about the actual inner ear model, we're going to be having CARFAC in there. And CARFAC's output is the neural activity pattern. And we're going to be comparing the neural activity patterns. A neural activity pattern is basically the state that comes out of the inner hair cells at any time. And effectively, we get what could be a large matrix out of this. And we're going to be doing a comparison and then using this as a training signal. As Simon mentioned, we can back propagate through this. One of the nice things about our JAX implementation is that it's actually differentiable, which was a real technical feat to make happen. The loss function that we've got here for the comparison, the important part about it is to make sure that we make it actually relate to the way that the central auditory system processes them. So we can't just make something like, we can't make up our own loss function here. We have to make one that we think is going to be doing something similar to the central auditory system. So going even more deeply about what's happening inside CARFAC. We're basically, inside CARFAC, we've got a number of parts of this model. The model internally contains a state at any time of the basilar membrane, which is the physical state in there. A model of the outer hair cells and how effective they are and their current state when they last fired, that kind of thing. Similarly for inner hair cells. And we've also got our automatic gain control in there so that we model efferent signals. The model's got high fidelity to the actual cochlea. We've got a number of implementations. Our one is based in JAX, which is a framework written on top of Python that is commonly used for the machine learning world nowadays. Our implementation has two features that are really important for us going forward technically. One, we've got automated optimization to execute on TPUs, GPUs, and CPUs. And we've got the automated ability to calculate gradients of these things. That means we can run a stochastic gradient descent system. So what's left to do is define a loss function that's appropriate. So one of our candidates is to do something which is a stabilized auditory image, which takes a look at like an auditory image correlogram, so autocorrelation across frequency channels, and we can see periodicity out of it. And if I play this little video, hopefully it works. So I'm sorry about that last noise, which was a little bit unpleasant, but it should be clear that the videos and the images that we get could be used to actually help us understand how the cortex processes some of these signals. And we could use the image itself as a loss function. So comparing two output SAIs. And here's a number of other examples. So each SAI is an image of some time window of audio. And what we're seeing here are various examples from different audio stimulus. So one of the other ones that we would like to do as a part of this is either the SAI movie here or looking at the structured similarity index on the naps themselves. This is also, of course, part of our research. Structural similarity is based on comparing two images and really looking for some of the moments of change in there. Based on luminance, contrast, and structure channels in there. And so we use the structured similarity loss to give us a loss function for our training signals based on some of these movies that we see. Then one final aspect we're going to add to this is include a regularizer. And the thing that we want to do out of this regularizer is to make sure that we add a loss function for how far away we are from an existing hearing aid. So we take the output of our hearing aid and compare it to the output of a regular hearing aid, and then put in something as simple as a mean squared error loss and just add it to our total loss. The reason we want to do this is that we don't want to have a radically different algorithm, and we want to make sure that what our output is relatively close to existing hearing aid algorithms. A big part of this is to make sure that people are comfortable with this as an experience if they transition from a different hearing aid to one of our ones. Talk about the end-to-end model, and to reimagine this, we're going to have Jason join us.
Thank you very much, Bob. So in this section of the talk, we're going to discuss how we use the CARFAC model, which when initialized with its base parameters, should essentially represent the average human cochlea, and train it with physiological constraints to generate an individualized fit, all with the ultimate goal of generating a personalized hearing aid. So the main issue we face when personalizing the CARFAC model is how to compare its output, the neural activity pattern, let's see if I can, there we go, or NAB, compare that to actual human data from the auditory nerve. Now the problem is that accessing information from the auditory nerve, or the complete information, is difficult, especially in a non-invasive fashion. So we overcome this issue by using a model of neural perception, as Simon referred to, as well as a machine learning based classifier to connect the, well, that's the challenge, connect the NAP to some observable measures from the clinic. The first observable measure that we use is the pure tone audiogram, as Simon referred to. It's a staple tool of the audiologist for over 100 years, and a measure of hearing thresholds in quiet that generate an individualized profile at specific prescribed frequencies for an individual's left and right ear, as shown here for the left ear in blue crosses and for the right ear with red circles. So these individualized threshold values are actually shown relative to thresholds for an average normal hearing person, where shown as a green line here, dotted line at 0, where values below 20 dB, so lower than this line, would be considered to be an increasing hearing loss. So to generate a personalized fit of the Carfax model from an individual's audiogram, we use a training framework that compares the output of Carfax to pure tones at levels specified by an individual's pure tone audiogram against the output of Carfax to silence. Using a measure of discriminability called the D prime, we determine, which is used to then determine when the two Carfax outputs differ, with a D prime value of 1 being a threshold. We can then use again this detection or discriminatory loss to as a training signal, by which the impaired model weights can be trained, hopefully until the D prime values necessarily are exactly or achieved or close to 1, and therefore representing a system where the audiogram is that the impaired model is able to necessarily perceive at the levels that is prescribed by the audiogram. Now, while pure tone audiograms may be useful to describe some mild to severe hearing losses, they really only present a very limited number of pure tone frequencies for testing, as an extremely restricted number of intensities. Therefore, this method of personalizing the Carfax model may not ultimately generalize across the population of individuals with hearing difficulties. So to combat this and to include more super threshold stimuli, we've adopted a vowel consonant vowel, or VCV test. So this consists of presenting these VCV tokens, such as the ugu here, that's the waveform for ugu, either with or without noise, and asking the subject to indicate which VCV token they heard. So in this case, you can see that the subject correctly responded with ugu. After listening to a number of VCV tokens with different consonants and then giving their responses, it's possible to generate a confusion matrix where the presented consonants can be compared to the predicted consonants, here on the Y and the X-axis respectively, where the number of numbers in the diagonal represent the number of correct VCV identifications. So how do we actually then go from that to individualizing a version of the Carfax from these VCV confusion matrices? Well, first of all, we have developed, Nima Salimi has developed a simple VCV classifier for the normal hearing version of the Carfax model. So this takes temporally smooth output of Carfax in response to the VCV and makes predictions as to the actual identity of that VCV token. Again, presenting multiple VCV tokens will lead to the generation of a confusion matrix, as we can see here shown on the right. The next step is we plan to actually personalize the Carfax model by freezing that VCV classifier for the normal hearing model and comparing its confusion matrix output to an individual's experimentally derived confusion matrix as part of a VCV confusion matrix loss function. So here you can see that individual's target confusion matrix. Again, the loss acts as the training signals to actually train the weights within the impaired Carfax model with the ultimate goal to minimize the difference between confusion matrices and hopefully successfully achieve a personalized version of the Carfax. But when we're talking about the impaired Carfax model, what are those underlying features of the model that we're actually looking to manipulate? In the original version of the Carfax, it fundamentally only represented the inner workings of the cochlea, so as indicated here with the blue arrow. But as the schematic shows, you can see there are numerous other elements that exist within the actual auditory periphery. And some of these are ones that we've actually assimilated into more recent versions of Carfax. So the first site we consider is actually not in the inner ear, but is the middle ear. It has the smallest bowels in the body. It helps sounds to overcome the impedance mismatch you see between the air-filled cavity in the inner ear, ear canal, and the liquid-filled cochlea. And the middle ear filter is a transfer function that actually leads to a bandpass sort of shape with a maximum gain of around 20 dB at about 1 kilohertz. This is actually from data from human data from postmortem. And an impacted middle ear filter would be the equivalent of actually having some form of conductive hearing loss, such as that. The second side of potential hearing loss is the cochlear gain mechanism that we associate with outer hair cells in the inner ear itself. So this underlies the compressive gain that you see in a healthy ear, as shown by this solid line here. We actually are able to manipulate outer hair cell health as part of a parameter, and by decreasing that outer hair cell health, we can lead to this dotted line. Let's see, sorry, here we go, it should come up. Yep, so leaving this essentially linear gain that can lead to as much as 50 dB loss in gain at the highest frequencies at the lowest stimulus levels. The third and final site we consider for hearing impairment is the loss of auditory nerve fibers. So if we actually were to look at it, as you can see here from these firing rates of two different classes of auditory nerve fiber, there are in fact multiple classes whose dynamic range help to cover the extensive range of sound intensities that we encounter in daily life outside and inside as well. So what you can see here is that there's a low threshold fiber, which is the one on the left. I'm not sure if you can see any pointing, but the curve on the left represents a low threshold fiber which covers ranges from about 0 to 40 dB SPL, and therefore are the fibers the most active during in quiet environments, whereas the high threshold fibers on the other extreme, they can encode stimuli at the highest levels up to 50 to 100 dB, and then particularly important for noisy environments. So when we're training the impaired CARFAT model, we can remove both fiber types, leading to a very severe form of hearing loss, or we could selectively ablate one population or remove one population. Most interestingly, probably removing this high threshold population, because that would be equivalent to essentially something called hidden hearing loss, a phenomenon where an individual may come to a audiological clinic complaining of hearing difficulties, especially noise, and yet present with totally normal hearing pure tone audiogram thresholds. So, of course, in training the impaired CARFAT model, it's highly likely that we're going to need a combination of all three hearing impairments, but with a special sort of emphasis, I think, on the inner and outer hair cells, on the gain and on the inner hair cell loss, when we're trying to individualize to a particular person's loss. Thank you for listening, and I'll pass you now on to my colleague, Marianne, who will talk a bit about the electrical hearing side of the project.
So, hi, everyone. My name is Maria Mosseni, and I'm one of the postdocs working on this AFHI project. And today I'm going to tell you about how we can use the CARFAT model to create sound coding strategies for cochlear implant users. So cochlear implants are great at bypassing damaged hair cells, and while they do a great job at restoring hearing to people with hearing loss due to some technological restrictions. They're not great at restoring important auditory features such as the onset enhancement, spectrotemporal modulations, and traveling wave patterns. And these are all very important for everyday situations, such as understanding speech and noise or music appreciation. So if we had a model of how these hair cells should work, we can use it to mimic the auditory nerve responses with the cochlear implants, which would lead to a more natural sounding speech for all music for cochlear implant users. So the first thing we need is to have a model of the cochlea. And here we're using the CARFAT model as previously described. So what you see here is the output of the CARFAT model. And this is in response to an input audio, the lady is sewing a dress. And this is what we call a neurogram. And a neurogram shows which neurons going from base to apex of the cochlea or high to low frequencies are going to be active at each time step, and also what's the level of their activity. And one of the great features of CARFAT is, as you see at the bottom, It's great at representing the onset enhancement and traveling wave patterns and spectral-temporal modulations, and which are all very important for speech perception. And that's one of the reasons we're using the SCARFAC model for our project. So now that we have an auditory model, we need a way to get the neural responses for a cochlear implant stimulation. What you see, and that's done through the electrical hearing model. And so what you see here is a typical cochlear implant stimulation pipeline. And in this pipeline, when the sound enters through the microphone, after some pre-processing on the sound, the fast Fourier transform of the sound is found. And then usually the FFT has a lot of frequency bands, but in a cochlear implant, we only have 22 electrodes. So we need to map these frequency bands onto 22 frequency channels. And after that, we find the envelope on each of these channels. And to minimize the interactions between different electrodes, for each time sample, we can find the 8 channels with highest energy out of these 22 channels. And we use this to modulate pulses in an interleaved pattern. And the output of this is what we call electrodogram, which basically shows us the electrodes at each time and also the current value on the electrode. If we input this if we take this electrodogram and we pass it to the electrical hearing model, which is the in the red rectangle there, we get what we call a CI neurogram. So what's an electrical hearing model? An electrical hearing model has 2 components. The first component is a finite element model, which will give us the current spread through the cochlea, and that's that shows us that when we activate one cochlear, one CI channel or electrode, which neurons are going to be activated in response to the current on that channel. And the second component of the electrical hearing model is some physiological properties of neurons, such as refractoriness and adaptation. So when we input the same sound through the normal hearing model and the cochlear implant stimulation, as you see here, the neurograms we get from these 2 are completely different. Specifically, cochlear implant is not great at representing those onsets and any of those time frequency patterns. So why is this happening? The main reason this is happening is the current spread, and this is because the different electrodes in a cochlear implant are not but they can interact with each other, and this is because cochlea is filled with a conductive fluid, and also the surrounding tissues also have conductive properties. So when one electrode is stimulated, the current spreads to surrounding electrodes, and it can activate those electrodes too. And since we cannot focus the current on only a small region of the cochlea, current spread leads to reduced frequency selectivity and spectral resolution. It also leads to losing precise timing information, as the current on one electrode can interfere with another electrode and destroy the timing information. And so that's why this is the main problem we're trying to address with creating a sound coding strategy that's based on a model of normal hearing. So this is the framework we're using. We pass the audio input through the CARFAC model, and we get normal neurograms, which are our targets. From these neurograms, we get neural envelopes, and we pass them through the DNN-based sound coding strategy. And at the output of this sound coding strategy, we get the electrodogram, and we pass it through the electrical hearing model to get the cochlear implant neurograms. We compare the cochlear implant neurograms with the target neurograms, which are the normal hearing outputs of the CARFAC. And we compare these two through the custom loss function, and we use the difference between these two to train our DNN-based sound coding strategy. And what we're hoping to achieve here is basically to find the inverse of the electrical hearing model. So we can take into account the current spread and refractoriness and adaptation. So at the output, we get cochlear implant neurograms that match the normal hearing neurograms. I'm going to pass you back to Simon to round up.
Thanks, Mariam. Jason, Rob. I think what's worth emphasizing here is the enormous amount of innovation that's gone into the thinking that has just been put in front of you. Literally nobody anywhere in the world is thinking of this problem in these ways. And so we think we've got a really interesting edge and angle in terms of reimagining the hearing aid. The project's been going for just over 2 years, and this is, I'm not going to go through all of these have been touched on by people, but just to give you an idea of the range of things that this particular project work package has been focused on. We will be starting human testing with the electric hearing within the next handful of weeks. And we've already started testing acoustic hearing with humans, particularly looking at a new class of tests that Jason previewed, the VCV super threshold tests as inputs to these training algorithms. This year is going to be pretty well focused on moving from a sort of master hearing aid approach to really thinking about the ML-based hearing aid. And we've got some great work. In fact, Rob is leading some great work looking at the way we can adapt some existing acoustic machine learning models to begin to behave more like a hearing aid and be able to fit into our machine learning framework. I think as Rob was emphasizing, you know, a lot of what we do is, or a lot of what we're able to achieve is related to how we fine tune our loss functions. And so there's an enormous amount of work that's going on there. Okay, so the next project area that we're working on, I'm going to zoom through this one pretty quick because I want to leave some time for questions and discussion. The problem, one of the problems we have is that our standard measures of audibility, so the speech intelligibility index, for instance, and I'm not going to go into the mechanics of this, aren't particularly good predictors of the way in which hearing aids facilitate or fail to facilitate discussions in noisy environments where there are lots of other talkers going on. Now, part of the problem is then, you know, you can't improve what you can't measure. We really need to be measuring performance in the environments, in the listening and interactive scenarios that people using hearing aids find themselves in every day. So that's what this second package of work is all about. It's about how can we test hearing aid performance in real world environments, and, you know, so we can actually measure what we're trying to improve. But it's also providing a platform for developing machine learning models that are able to then predict when someone is having or about to have listening difficulty based on the audio that it can pick up and physiological sensors, and I'll come to that in a second. And what you can do with that signal then is you can optimize the hearing aid performance, but you can do it in a way that is cognizant or is situated in the context, listening context, and therefore the listening needs of the individual. So currently, the way that hearing aids are performing in the wild is measured using this system called ecological momentary assessment, or EMA, and basically it's a questionnaire delivered on a smartphone. Now, it's got a lot of downsides. It's intrusive, disruptive, introspective. We don't get a lot of good data from it. And so what we want to do is we want to keep the smartphone in the picture, but actually connect it up to the cloud, do a lot of online and on-device computation, and integrate with a whole bunch of other things, and put machine learning models on there that are able to do environmental analysis. So we can then do a whole bunch of measures on hearing aid performance, and indeed, end up controlling the hearing aid when the person is using this application. So this is an example of the platform. It's based on a smartphone at the moment. We're using a Pixel phone simply because we've got plenty of those because we're Google. But we've developed it in Flutter, so it's easily cross-compilable to iOS as well. We've integrated it with the earbud. In this case, obviously, we've integrated it with a Pixel Bud. And there are plenty of hooks for integrating it with hearing aids and cochlear implants. But probably the biggest value add here is we've integrated it with the smartwatch sensors. That could be an Apple Watch or any smartwatch. We happen to be using a Google Watch. Now, what the smartwatch sensors do is they give us an insight into the autonomic activity of an individual. So it gives us what your heart rate is, heart rate variation, oxygen saturation, electrodermal activity, so galvanic skin response, how people are moving. And these are all indicators then of stress or focus and this kind of thing. So these all then become inputs into what we've illustrated over here, sort of acoustic and other measures of environmental classification. So we're using an established model called YAMNet, which is classifying the environments that the person is in. We're developing models that can do conversational engagement analysis. Is this person talking to other people? How many people are talking? Is there a lot of interaction going on? What's the vocal effort of someone? Is someone expressing difficulty in understanding? Are they simply saying things like, I'm sorry, pardon, can you repeat that? These are all things that can be picked up by these machine learning models. Now, at the moment, all this development is going on the cloud, but, well, not YAMNet. We've finished that development on the cloud, and now YAMNet has been instantiated on the neural accelerator on the phone. And the idea is to get all of these machine learning models working on the phone. So, again, quickly summarizing where we're up to with that project area is that there's a lot of ground truth data that's been collected in the lab here, in the labs here at Macquarie. We've completed the development of EMA proof of concept platform using Flutter. As I said, the advantage there is it's cross-compilable to any smartphone. And we're well on our way in developing different machine learning models. So acoustic scene classification, listening difficulty detection, and voice activity detection and conversation interaction detection. We've already done one validation of the platform. We had 10 subjects carry around the platform with for I think it was about 10 weeks and collected an awful lot of data and validating that against how people were rating their listening experiences. And we further developing machine learning models and piloting communication difficulty. Now, before I finish up, one thing I want to emphasize here is that on the one hand, as a research exercise, one of the outcomes that we're looking for here, obviously, is publishing the results of the experiments that we do. But the other thing, which is, again, really quite innovative, I think, is that we're intending to outsource everything that we've been talking to you about. The machine learning platform, CARFAC has already outsourced the machine learning models, as well as the PRISM EMA system. And the reason we're doing this is we want to give it to the world to stimulate serious innovative research and development. There's so much to do here. We're so limited in our own resources, although we've done pretty well with what we've got. But there's so much to do that we want to provide the sets of tools for entrepreneurs and smart scientists working out of garages, if they want, to really push the needle on innovative development in hearing impairment. Okay, thank you. So we've now time for questions. Let me expand the view that we've got here so you can see everybody in the let's get off this. And is it? I'm having trouble with this.
Shall we all just gather around?
Yeah, gather around. I'll try to get the temp control off again. Yeah, okay. Okay, so open for questions, please.
Looks like there's a question from Harvey Dillon.
Yeah, great talk and much enjoyed it and fantastic technology.
Excellent.
My question is about the target, whether you're aiming too low in or aiming in the wrong place to try and simulate the normal neural network pattern. Because when you're listening to me now, all of the frequencies are not equally loud. The low frequencies will be louder to you because that's the characteristics of my voice and everybody else's voice. And we normal hearers have got the luxury of putting up with that because we've got a big dynamic range available at every frequency. But once you've got hearing loss, of course, that dynamic range shrinks. And so I'm wondering if a normal neural pattern is actually a suboptimal goal for your hearing aid.
I'll turn it over to Jason in a moment, but first a couple of thoughts. First would be that the using the normal activity pattern is just the ground truth, the gold standard that we want to hit. And what we're doing is we're looking at our modeled impaired neural activity pattern and then working out what we have to do at the front end of the hearing impaired ear, or in this case the model, to actually bring it back to the normally hearing pattern. So we totally understand the fact that the transfer function of the hearing impaired ear is highly abnormal. But what we're looking to do then, in a similar sort of way to what current hearing aids do, is to boost it where it needs boosting, to compress it where it needs compressing, but also to do a bunch of other things that we're hopeful that taking a machine learning approach, that this sort of input-output mapping can find some really novel solutions to the problems that we've got. Do you want to add anything to that, Jason?
I guess we could also mention that one of the other tests that we haven't incorporated or talked about here is the categorical loudness scaling that actually will also allow individuals, or at least get some information about how individuals are actually categorizing loudness. And therefore, we can sort of plug that back into the training loops and see how that actually any hearing aid or any other any other thing that we create to actually help with the hearing actually will impact that as well. So yes, that's one aspect. But it is true, Harvey, that what we've actually seen as well in terms of our initial sort of training groups is that we do see that when we've been trying to work with the MHA, that indeed actually using or changing or moving away from the MHA gains, what we actually find is that there is that spread, upward spread for low frequencies actually does that impact, so that we want to actually decrease some of the gains that we actually see accordingly in the actual MHA as well. So that's one thing that relates back to what you say as well. So we are aware of it, I think, as well, and that we're incorporating it as
Thanks.
Harvey, I'd also add that the thoughts that you've got here are spot on in many ways, and we're looking at making sure that our training data that we're talking about is going to be representative and useful. So incorporating, a wide dynamic range in our training data and our evaluation data, and incorporating a wide range of audio as what we're using for training to make sure that we end up having a representative sample.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pleasure. David, good to see you, mate.
Yeah, good to see you too, Simon, and thanks to everyone for a really fascinating talk. it strikes me that research in this domain is up against sort of philosophical bottleneck of qualia. You know, what does the world sound like to someone else? And that's something that's really hard to get a handle on. So it was really interesting to, you know, think about the VCV approach and so on. But leaving that to one side, let's imagine that we can infer the parameters of a CARFAC model that accurately capture the perceptual experience of someone. Maybe they've got a hearing impairment, maybe not. Someone's perceptual experience. My question is, then what? What are the levers that you are thinking about controlling or adjusting to compensate or to adjust for the differences? You know, typically with an acoustic hearing aid, you'd be thinking about turning the gains up on different frequency bands. But yeah, and with a CI, you know, there are maybe some different things there. But I'd be really interested to understand, you know, what your thinking is at this stage about things that you might change to compensate for differences in someone's ability to hear.
Yeah, super interesting question, David. Look, you've got to the core of why we're using the neural activity pattern, because whether it's speech or some kind of musical qualia or, you know, ambient perception, for the normally hearing listener, it's based on the pattern of action potentials that are carried in the auditory nerve. So that's our figure of merit. That's what we're trying to baseline to. Now, yes, you're right. There's a bunch of things we could do. I don't know whether we'd use, you know, 8, 16, 24, 128 channels in a hearing aid to get back to where we wanted to. But in a way, because we're using deep learning, we don't really need to worry about that, because what the machine learning models enable us to do is to search this huge parameter space to work out what is the best way. You know, I mean, we could be doing billions of iterations of training for a machine learning hearing aid to get to that point where it's brought the neural activity pattern in the hearing impaired model as close as it can to the normally hearing model. So it's, in a way, it's almost atheoretical about what we're doing. It's theoretical in the sense that we've captured theory about the way the inner ear is working using CARFAC, but we're not presuming any particular signal processing approach to deal with it. We're allowing the machine learning and the billions of iterations of training to find that solution.
I guess as you're speaking, I'm thinking that yeah, the models of hearing may involve adjusting many parameters, but ultimately there's maybe not that many parameters in a hearing aid
at the moment, correct,
or a CI. Yeah. And so somehow or other we've got to like take, you know, and I'm assuming that we can have a, you know, an accurate and high fidelity model of via CARFAC of loss, but somehow we have to squish the richness of that model back down into a much smaller set of adjustable parameters for the hearing aid and the CI. And I just wondered.
There's fortunately, some of my collaborators are highly experienced in taking large models and shrinking them down so they'll fit on a phone or another smaller device. And so even relatively inexpensive earbuds now have neural accelerators in them, which are, you know, really quite capable. And we're only just starting to think about ways in which we can use those. So there's a lot of promise and capability already out there, and it's only going to get better.
Thank you so much. Love your work.
Thanks, David. Got a couple more minutes if there's another question.
I see there's a couple of questions posted in the chat.
Oh.
I don't know if you can see that, Simon. I don't know if those folks want to come off mute and just ask the question live, given there's only a couple of minutes left.
Oh, hey,
I have one.
Oh,
Yeah, go on.
Oh, I was just wondering about the like fine-tuning the loss function, and there was some comments about that being a really big area. Where do you see that heading in the future?
Do you want to take that, Rob?
No, you've basically hit upon the head of what's one of our primary interests, and effectively, you know, we're in the middle of really creating our training and evaluation harnesses to be able to iterate on that. Frankly, it depends on where we get positive and negative feedback from end users about how well we're doing. There's a whole bunch of details in those loss functions that we didn't talk about here. For instance, you know, details something like if we're introducing a hearing aid, there's latency introduced by the hearing aid, and we want to automatically compensate against that, so we're not including that as a loss. You know, adding a hearing aid into the loop will automatically add some milliseconds of latency or some time. So we want to make sure that we're not really penalizing a hearing aid for adding in any delay. Yeah, there's a number of different directions that we're thinking about. None of them have been concretely yes or no, so it's an open question. I'd love to give you a more concrete answer, but it's definitely one of the really interesting things that we're doing.
Yeah, cheers for that.
I think we're at time, Scott.
Yeah, I can see. I see the numbers dropping. So people are logging out. Hey, thank you so much, Simon, and the whole team for presenting today. Yes, super interesting project, really exciting stuff. For everyone else on the call, the recording will be live. We'll try and get it up in about 48 hours.
Great,
Thank
Scott.
you very much. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to present the work too. It's been a lot of fun.
Good. Thank you.
Cheers.